Welcome everybody, and I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. My name is Katherine Riley. I am the INCITE Program Manager. If you have been here before, I am new to the Program Manager role. Judy Hill, who was the previous Program Manager, left Oak Ridge earlier this year, and I took over. I am not new to the program. I have been involved with INCITE since the onset of the program, and I'm also the Director of Science for the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. So I'll be launching off our talk today, and Marta Garcia and Dimitro Bikov from Oak Ridge will also be speaking, and they're going to dive a little bit more into details about not just the resources, but specifics about the proposals and how we can help you. During the talk, there is a chat option with BlueJeans that you can use if you want to ask a question while we're speaking. I cannot necessarily see that, say, while I'm speaking, but we will bring that forward. Somebody might even answer in text, but then at the end of the talk as well, we will have an opportunity for people to unmute and ask questions. I always encourage questions. I feel like everybody gets a lot more out of it when people are asking questions. It's sort of getting sometimes to the meat of the matter when people ask, so please feel free. And with that, I will jump in and get started. So why are we here today, right? What are we hoping to accomplish? So what we want to help you do is learn the sort of the best practices and the details about writing a proposal to obtain allocations to the INCITE program, and these are on the DOE's Leadership Computing Facilities. We're going to walk through the key components of each proposal. That's the proposal narrative, and it's up to 15 pages. And we want to give you a sense of what we are looking for within that narrative, so that you don't have to second guess, is this what they're looking for, or are they looking for something else? We want to make sure it's really clear what we're looking for, and so you can basically put your best foot forward in order to compete. In terms of timeline, we're very close. We're nearing the end of the open call, so that call for new proposals is due in 2 weeks from today, June 18th. And in addition to that, we have renewals that will be due later in the year, and I'll touch on that in the next slide. But also in terms of a larger timeline as you're competing this year, and you're sort of getting a sense of when you'll know information, we will notify PIs in November of this year. Normally that is early November for awards that will start January 1. INCITE operates on a calendar year. So you will see January 1 to December 31st as your increment for when you are able to use your allocation. As I mentioned, there are new and renewal proposals. So for new proposals, these are for PIs who do not have a current active proposal, whose previous proposal has ended, and you may apply for a 1, 2, or 3 year proposal. So the details on that we will get to, but fundamentally, for say a multi-year proposal, we are looking at the primary detail being on how you will tackle, this problem, what requires a multi-year proposal versus a 1-year proposal. For renewals, these are PIs with active multi-year awards. And so if you are in year 1 or year 2 of a multi-year award, then you may submit a renewal. You would have already been contacted by me if you were eligible, but if you have any questions about whether you are eligible or not, feel free to reach out. There's a later timeline for those renewals because what we're actually asking out of a renewal is slightly different, but also because if you can imagine, right, if you were in your first year of a project and you have 6 months basically only of time to report back on what you've accomplished, we found that it's really valuable to give them new projects every week we can, right, in order to demonstrate progress and be able to have a successful renewal. So today's agenda, I'm going to walk you through the allocation programs and our mission and our recent statistics, and then we will walk you through what resources are available for this coming allocation period, and then some of these tips, these best practices and things that we're looking for in the proposal. We will have a Q&A and then a few concluding slides just to remind you about issues with submitting and the reviews and award decisions. A few points if you are not new and you've looked at INCITE in previous years. The first one is one that was new last year, but it's rather important, so I wanted to repeat it. that all submission materials have to be sort of one big PDF for submission. So when you're looking at the components of the proposal on PeerNet, like you have an executive summary, a project narrative, personnel justification, all of these need to be in one big file as you're uploading it to submit on PeerNet. But some new changes to this year, first and foremost is an early career track. And I will go into a little bit more detail about this later, but the short version of this is that we really want to encourage the next generation of researchers to be competitive and to pursue how they might be able to use leadership computing in their research. So we are committing 10% of our allocatable time to those within 10 years from earning their PhD. I'll walk through sort of the ins and outs there. This is not necessarily, an easier path because projects will go through the same peer review, but it's really a way to sort of call out those in their early career and increase their chances of success. For other new changes for this coming year, there is a new resource. Last year, we saw the exascale systems as possible resources to request in the out years in the third year. But we also have a new system on the list this year, which is Polaris, going in at the ALCF. This is a hybrid CPU-GPU machine. It will be available to INCITE at the beginning of 2022. So this is the next calendar year. The challenge with Polaris is it is still partially under NDA, but it is, I think, a machine that many people who are already capable of using GPUs will have a lot of readiness for effectively. And we'll get into what that means in this webinar. Also, users of Theta at the ALCF will have access to a new file system. New file systems, Eagle and Grand. But this is also a file system that is designed for file sharing. So this might be something that if you are sharing data sets with external collaborators, for example, who aren't even at one of the leadership computing facilities, we actually are able to support that really effectively on these file systems. All right. So a little bit of background. For the leadership computing facilities, there are three big buckets of time. When you look at the entire systems and where all of their compute hours go and their resources go, 60% or up to 60% of the resources go to the INCITE program. So INCITE really represents, the vast majority of the time that is used on the leadership computing facilities. 20% goes to the Oscar Leadership Computing Challenge. This is ALCC. And the other 20% goes to director's discretionary. So the director's discretionary is really a place where projects can get ready to submit proposals, work on scalability, explore ideas to sort of determine if they're capable or ready to compete for an INCITE or an ALCC for that matter. But today we are going to be focused mostly on INCITE. And if you have other program questions, say about the discretionary time or the ALCC time, I encourage you can reach out to me. And I will make sure you're talking to the right person. I am the right person for ALCF, and I'll connect you to the right person, for example, Bronson for OLCF. So what is INCITE, and where did it come from? INCITE stands for, because this is DOE, it is an acronym, it stands for the Innovative and Novel Computational Impact on Theory and Experiment. And the driving idea behind INCITE was to provide transformational advances in science and technology through allocations on compute and data resources that people would not be able to get elsewhere. So really to provide the ability to impact the direction of a field of research through compute or data intensive work that wouldn't be feasible if we did not build the LCFs. We cover almost all areas of research. I feel like there has not been an area we haven't touched over the history of the program. And included in here are even things like, working with NIST on standardized materials or things like concrete, right? It's a broad range of areas and a broad range of approaches to problems that INCITE has addressed. And I mean, I could read through these, but really what I want to get across is there's never been an area of research where we look and go, no, somehow or another that's not applicable. Everything for the most part has found a niche, right, in a way that INCITE has been able to help advance their field. So the INCITE criteria. This is a very competitive program, and the primary way that you are reviewed or your proposal is reviewed is looking at your research campaign and whether that research campaign has the potential for significant domain or community impact. And I use campaign here in a general term. I know that historically that's often been used to, I have a big compute thing that I need to do, but it can also be, I have a big data set that I need to generate, right? Or something like that, right? It is not meant to be sort of the purely historical use of the word campaign. But that is the dominant way that these proposals are evaluated and what we're looking for in the most detail. The second component is the computational leadership criteria. So the question is, could this work be done somewhere else? If it could not be done somewhere else, then it meets the computational leadership criteria. But there's a broad variety of needs, right, that might actually be defining computational leadership criteria. It's not necessarily always just compute capability. Sometimes it is something particular about the architecture or something about your data needs or your AI needs at scale that really make a project stand out. And the third component really is eligibility criteria. This is a very simple one because for the most part you are eligible to apply. It is agnostic of your funding source and it is agnostic to your location to a degree. There are some minor exceptions to that. Apologies, I hit the go, which is just that we have some restrictions on countries that can gain access, like state sponsors of terrorism, as the federal government defines it, are the biggest limitations that we can provide access to. But for the most part, everyone conducting open science is eligible to compete and will win an award. So as I mentioned, this scientific merit is the key component. But I wanted to pull apart both the review process for new proposals and contrast that a little bit with the renewal assessment for the review process for renewal assessments, and give you a sense of how this breaks down. So the science panels, the peer review and the science panels are the most appropriate. What happens is a project comes in and perhaps it is in biology. And so there is a panel that is focused on biology where we make, an effort to really have a diverse set of experts who can look at these proposals and assess our criteria for us. We also have other panels. So for example, we have a data and artificial intelligence or learning panel where we put proposals that have a large learning component or a large data component. And really that's to provide the secondary assessment on the methodology and the applicability of the learning technologies and the particular problem. But we're looking there in a new proposal at the appropriateness of the method that they have chosen. And as I said already, like the impact of the work being done, but also is the proposal well organized, right? Do you have milestones that make sense? Is the team that's going to be working on this project reasonable? Are they the right people to be doing this? And does the request for time and resources seem reasonable? And one way to think about that is sometimes the panel is looking at it and going, is answering this question worth this much resource? But another way to look at this is, that they might look at that and go, well, this is the methodology they're using. I know that methodology. It should be a lot more expensive. Why is it so cheap? Or it seems far more expensive than I think it should be. And they're looking at that question as well. In addition, we do a computational readiness review, and we'll talk even more about that. But fundamentally, this is looking at your readiness for your project to tackle this problem at the LCFs. The facilities themselves execute this. So the staff, the scientific staff at the ALCF and OLCF both execute this technical readiness review. We're looking to make sure, have you run on similar systems, or best yet, have you run at one of the LCFs? You know what you're doing. Are you ready to move forward? For the renewal assessment, it is slightly different. Here, your scientific and technical merit, as long as you've stayed on scope, has already been reviewed, right? It was reviewed in the first year where you submitted your proposal. We're primarily looking for whether you have met your milestones, whether you have changed the scope of your work, which at that point, right, might mean that you do need to have a re-review of your work, and whether we think you're on track to meet your future milestones. One thing I do tell to renewal projects, right, if they feel like they have a substantial change to their scope, to talk to me about that. And I can help them get a sense about whether, I think that's actually really a large scope change and that they might need to actually submit a new proposal, or whether this is within the scope of the proposal and and can move forward. For the computational readiness on the renewals, really this is similar to the previous, right? We're making sure that you are on track. You might have had technical milestones in your proposal. That's completely reasonable, right? As you're developing capabilities for out years, making sure those are on track and that you're having success on the system. After that, we move into the award decisions. So the awards for the INCITE program are made by the Leadership Computing Facility directors, the program managers, and the directors of science. And in that process, we bring in other members of management from both facilities to have input where appropriate. But we look primarily at the results from the peer review process. And then given those results, given those top ranked proposals, we look at the computational readiness, and that you can sort of think about readiness as this risk assessment, right? Given these top ranked proposals, are these projects ready to go, or will we have to, for example, have a lot of staff to make sure they're successful and things akin to that. So as I mentioned, there are some limitations of what can be done on these systems. The primary one is that there are federal law regulates what can be done here, right? So we have cybersecurity plans that bound what kind of data we can and cannot store. Those rules are slightly different from the LCFs, so it is worthwhile contacting me and I can help you resolve any of those questions. But really, that's only relevant, say, if you have PII or classified information or unclassified sensitive information, like the kind of categories we have listed here. Bring those up. We actually ask that also as you're filling out your proposal, but it is far better for us to know beforehand so that we can resolve those before your proposal comes in. And whether or not we can host them or not. Sometimes people find creative ways around these, not to subvert them, but realizing that they can execute their project perhaps without using this sensitive information that we cannot have. Another common question is about proprietary work. So the LCFs, the ALCF and the OLCF are national user facilities. By definition, that is meant that anyone can apply against time, to the program to get time to use them, but you need to publish as open research. And so the follow-on from that is often, well, I can't publish, or I don't want to publish. This is proprietary. I work at a business or something akin to that, or collaborating with someone in industry, and we cannot publish. So what can we do? Fundamentally, if work is truly going to be proprietary, there's full cost recovery through a special proprietary user agreement. If, again, you think that this is going to be the case for your project, reach out to me immediately, and we will work through it. Again, I will say that, like in the previous example with sensitive data, that's a very hard limit, right? We just can't have the PII information on the system. But here, what often happens is it's clear that maybe a PI is using a piece of proprietary code, and the results can be open source. Those can be published, or perhaps there is a generalized geometry that they can execute the work where they'll still get the answers they want and they can still be published without releasing anything that is proprietary, or something creative akin to that. This is another way that projects have managed to avoid going through this. We can go through this. We can move this forward, but talk to me and let's figure out the details of the situation. One of the other common questions, and it has been a recurring one over the course of INCITE, is the difference between a community and an umbrella proposal. And the short version of this slide should perhaps be highlighted is that we do encourage community proposals, and we do not encourage umbrella proposals. And I will explain why, and I will also define these. So the first is community. Community proposals really reflect where a particular research community has joined together, they have consensus to a degree, right, on how to tackle a problem, and they're coordinating in sort of a larger collaboration to push that problem forward. And so perhaps this is often associated with really grand challenge scale science problems. When you are writing a community proposal, this is often reflected, right? It's normally clear from the proposal's management plan that this is not, just a single PI. This is a collaborative effort where we're working together to solve this problem. That is very different from an umbrella proposal. And an umbrella proposal is really a collection of individual proposals that are often pieced together in order to have a request that is large enough or has enough leadership computing criteria once they're all pieced together. But often umbrella proposals really don't have anything that's really cohesive that makes it a distinct proposal compared to just pulling out all of those pieces. The reason that the umbrella proposals are not as encouraged is because it is incredibly hard to effectively review an umbrella proposal. And I will explain this through, still general, but as an example. You might have an umbrella proposal that is looking at 8 different problems. And then you have a not umbrella proposal that is looking at one of those questions, right? So you have one whole proposal, all 15 pages of the narrative devoted to looking at a particular question, and then you have another umbrella proposal, and buried, within just 15 pages of this narrative, is a few paragraphs about how that project is going to be tackling that one problem. It's very difficult for our panelists when we're doing the peer review to compare this full 15-page narrative to this 2 or 3 paragraphs. And it is often unfair, right? It is often unfair both to the panelists, but even the review information, right, that the PIs are getting, because we just can't compare apples and oranges in this case. And so this has become so much of a challenge that we have in the past several years discouraged umbrella proposals. If you have confusion about whether you count as an umbrella proposal, again, reach out to me. I'm happy to walk through that, or even help you make an assessment about what the proposal looks like, or maybe what's missing that would move this from an umbrella proposal. All right, a few statistics, just to give you a sense of what INCITE has looked like. Last year for the 2021, or for this calendar year, right, with the last call for INCITE proposals, the vast majority of the PIs, not the vast majority, sorry, but the majority of the PIs were from universities, so 55%. We have a large representation also from government. In this case, that means national labs who are competing, and other government agencies like NASA. 9% were international PIs, and 4% were from industry. There were 51 projects total that were awarded, 17 of which were renewals. Most of the time, renewals are renewed. They have a very high renewal rate, although we absolutely have renewals that do fail now and then. And primarily, this is really driven by 2 things. One of them is change in scope. That's a really difficult one for us, and so change in scope often results in a rejection. But also, if there's a dramatic lack of progress, and we know through other mechanisms in our collaborations with that project that they're not going to make the right progress to be successful. And one other sort of key statistic that's buried in here is 35% of non-renewal submittals were accepted. So basically, of brand new proposals that were coming through, the acceptance rate was about 35%. And this is a little bit more statistics on previous year's awards. The 41 projects were awarded on Summit, 16 on Theta. This is really, that's a big difference in number. This is really driven by the fact that Theta is a very small resource on the, on the supercomputing side today. And so really their approach there is smaller awards with a bigger chunk of the system. The average and median project sizes for Summits and for Thetas are very consistent. So this is really giving you a sense that really that 450,000 mark on Summit and 1.2 million node hours on Theta are really about the size of the average award. There are some that are bigger, there are some that are smaller, but for the most part, that's really right in the range. And as you can see, 41 plus 16, it is not 51. You're very welcome to request time if you have a case for it, for time on both Theta and Summit. So in 21, there are 6 projects that have time on both Summit and Theta, and that's why the 41 plus 16 is actually 57 and not 51. One other bit of history, some historical numbers that I think is valuable. We didn't do this for 21, although I will be doing this, is some new proposals to statistics, right? So the PIs are not the same PIs over and over again. And I think that's an important one for people to understand. So 31% of the 2020 INCITE projects were PIs who had never led an INCITE proposal before. And 20% of the non-renewal projects were to new PIs. And so what that means are PIs who had never been a PI before. And I think those are very good numbers to show that we are bringing some new people in. This is not, the same set of people that you always see, or that you might think you're always seeing. There's a lot of diversity in our PIs. Right. And so a few notes about our science panels. In 21, for the 21 review, I should say, there were 78 researchers from various backgrounds that we pulled in for our science panels. And these were, very prestigious and exciting people we were able to convince to come in and do these reviews. You'll notice the breakdown is actually not super different than the breakdown for our awards last year. I think this is really mostly coincidental, but I think also demonstrates sort of where researchers are. We had about 55% from universities, U.S. universities, 20% from government, from labs and other government agencies, but 20% from industry and 10% international. There is significant continuity in the science panels from year to year, meaning that we don't have a complete reset of participants. So there's a lot of memory that goes from one year to another. And I say this because it is important and valuable to know as the author of a proposal that if you have written one before, if you are trying to respond perhaps to comments that you received in previous years, many of the panelists will have seen that before, right? And be looking for that. And also to point out, right, that this is, a very consistent, and slow moving group of people, right? We're not like resetting everything every single year in the review process. And as I mentioned before, when appropriate, proposals are also moved to the separate data and AI panel. They're not exclusively reviewed there. So we have times where we might have even a proposal that is reviewed by our astrophysics and our plasma panels because of an overlap. And in much the same way, if there is a proposal that has a large data and learning component, we will bring in our learning experts to sort of assess the methodologies going on in there. I mentioned earlier the early career path, and I wanted to come back to that pretty quickly and give people a sense of really what we're doing and why we're doing it. This is open to people less than 10 years out from their PhD who need LCF capabilities to move their research plan forward. The reason we did this, as I mentioned, was really to make sure that people early in their career felt that they could compete in INCITE. We have actually had decent history of success for early career researchers within INCITE. And really, though, I think that got lost, right? That gets lost sort of in the communication. You just see the PI list. You don't necessarily know who's early career and who's not unless you happen to know that person. So really, this is to call out that, but also to give this ability to compete to people who are early in their career who might think they have no chance against, very established and known people in their field, right? If they're looking at their old advisor going, I just can't compete. Well, the early career path actually gives you an opportunity. It can potentially increase the chance of you winning an award, and particularly because we're looking within this 10% pool of time. The proposals will still go through the same science review against all of the other proposals. We are going to be looking for those early career proposals that are still deemed meritorious, who have the need for LCF resources, but in our assessment of awards and what we might give, we're going to be considering the early career path. We have had questions before about whether postdocs can apply, and I mean, especially when you're looking within your first 10 years after your PhD, there's a big chunk of people who will be within their postdoc time in that window, and they can. Sometimes this requires a little bit of a conversation, because the biggest thing about postdoc is that they're not, normally in complete control of the research that they are doing, but also they're a lot less established sort of in where they are, meaning like their chance of leaving their position and taking another postdoc within the window of the proposal is much higher. And so we just, a conversation with us can actually help clarify that, or even pulling that into the management plan and the proposal to make sure you're explaining as a postdoc how you're going to mitigate that risk of, like my postdoc is fully funded with this funds, for the next 2 years, and I know I'm here. That these kinds of things are valuable for us to understand. The last 2 slides before I hand it over to talk about some more details is to clarify resources that will be available in the scope of time that you will be requesting for an INCITE proposal. So for a 1-year award, the resources available are Summit, Theta, and then a new system coming to the LCF, Polaris. This is the accelerated system that will be available early in 2022. In years 2 and 3, the exascale systems are available for request within your proposal. So this will be Aurora and Frontier. As we move into the 3rd year, Theta is likely to be retired. So Theta comes off of that in the 2024 year. So the challenge going forward for this proposal year is that the list is different for each year. For example, if someone is requesting Theta still in their 3rd year because sort of they've missed that note, that is okay. We can work with projects. But I think this is a valuable slide to come back to understand what you're looking at when you're writing your resource requests. The other component to make note of, right, is all our awards are in note hours. So the actual accurate unit when we talk about note hours is, say, a Theta note hour or a Summit note hour or a Polaris note hour. Because, of course, every single one of those nodes is different and every single one of those nodes has a different capability. We have some guidance here about approximate size of allocations that you might request on the different resources in, say, Summit equivalent node hours or Theta equivalent node hours. It's very hard to write a proposal for a machine that doesn't exist. And we know when people do that there is large error bars on the time that's being requested. And still given that, right, we are still saying that you may ask for Polaris, Frontier, and Aurora. So that time request, we're giving you some guidelines here of node hours on Polaris and Aurora and Summit that you can use to sort of think about what a reasonable size award is. On top of that, though, consider that this is not to say that, say, looking at Frontier, that 3 to 4 million is an equivalent award to what you might get on Summit today. It is really to point out that those are reasonable sized requests to make. It's computationally and going to be a much more significant award in terms of what you're going to be able to accomplish, because these machines are so much larger, right, than what we have on the floor today. So just keep in mind, right, that we're talking about a lot of power going on the floor in the next couple years between Polaris, Aurora, and Frontier. And with that, I will hand this over to Dima to talk a little bit more detail about these resources that are hitting the floor